3, 4. So without taking any further time, let's go ahead and talk about what is Identity PSK and why it was being created. So as we know, our WPA2 PSK, that it was being created to provide an easy passphrase configuration, and we can continue to use it on different types of devices like handheld devices or IoT devices, on notebooks, or anywhere, or even our sensors. And it has been worked really great. But certain industries, as more and more IoT devices have been coming up, in the terms of retail industry, public sector education, higher education, even enterprise, we are able to see more and more requirements that are coming up, trying to have a different group of devices trying to connect with internet through Wi-Fi, and they are capable of more with a PSK. So we still want to continue to provide a great our services, WLAN, Wi-Fi connectivity to them, but in a more secure way than rather than just an open connectivity, right? So why do we choose it? And that's where Identity PSK came into the picture, where we can have a selected group of devices, like IoT devices, and have a passphrase for them. And sensors, they can have their own, or any other barcode scanners, or digital signage, or iPads. They all can have their own, but instead of creating 4 different SSIDs in the network, and that will cost us the airtime. And as we know, more airtime leads to directly to the performance of end users. And we can see that with the Identity PSK, we have more improved security that continue to have it instead of an open SSID, we can have a passphrase PSK. It is currently available with WPA2 PSK, but yes, in future, we will have it with the WPA3 as well, with the simultaneous authentication of equal. Airtime improvement, because we can consolidate instead of having 8 SSIDs and 4 SSIDs with the WPA2 PSK, reduced it to the 1. So out of that, instead of 8, we will have just 5 PSK, not 5 WLANs available. And that would improve our airtime and definitely improve the performance of end users and their experience. So without going into much detail into here, this is based on an example of WPA3, but we can talk about more generalized with WPA2 PSK as well. So what does it do, and what does the controller, an ISE server or AAA server, plays a role over here? So our access request, as you can see, our client MAC addresses are stored, or the group and their password related to that particular group is saved at ISE server. An ISE server does not make a decision whether the client is going to be successfully authenticated or not. When the request comes in over here, as you can see, that the controller forwards that request to the ISE server, and ISE server provides that passphrase back to the controller. Controller checks that information against what does the AP forward that information from the client. As you can see, the client sends out that information, and that's where the authentication frame confirms that password. And after that, it creates its PMK ID generation, followed by association request, and that is followed by our 4-way handshake over here. So without taking any further time, let's move on to the configuration behind the scene. How we configure it on a 9800 wireless controller, and what configuration plays a role on an identity service engine. So as we can see over here, we will directly jump into the beginning of the security, where our radius server that we need to define and create a server group. So as you can see, we have our ISE server created, and its password, we need to make sure support for changeover authorization is enabled over here. We created a group with the same ISE server. And moving into the AAA method list, we need to be making sure about the authorization and accounting. So under ISE authorization, we need to be very sure about where we have chosen network because of the MAC filter authorization, and group because it is an external AAA server and have selected an ISE group. Similarly, in accounting, we will take a look into it that we have selected identity over here based on AAA server, and ISE group has been selected. So let's move on to what configuration will be there, right? And that way we can look into what else is there. So under configuration, tags and profiles, policy, iPSK policy. So what do we need to make sure status has been enabled, central switching over here, that's what we are working with. And the most important thing is, for our example, we have created two different VLAN and VLAN group we have created. Right, and we have AAA override has been enabled because in a real world, it's not going to be just a single user, but the group of devices are going to be there. And based on the QoS AVC profile that you need to configure and in advanced, what we need to be very sure about is this AAA policy, and allow AAA override has been configured. And the second most important thing is under accounting list that we have selected our appropriate ISE accounting that we created. Now let's move on to from policy. We need to take a look into what we have configured under tags. We have created an iPSK tag, and we will take a quick look into what WLAN profile we have created and its associated policy profile. So let's configure and take a look into WLAN. So for our example, we have already configured WLAN called iPSK and status WLAN ID, and take a look into our authorization list. We need to have it. MAC filtering needs to be enabled. For our example, we have WPA2 policy. Its encryption is AES. Authentication key management is selected as PSK, and a random pre-shared key that we are not going to use it in ICE. We can put any passphrase over here, even 1 to 8, 1 to 9, 1 to 10, whatever you want to put. It's not going to work for any of the devices that you are going to try to associate with this WLAN. And there is no layer 3 AAA configuration over here. We will just take a look into moving on to our basic configuration over here. For our example, to allow in between connection for a group of devices, we have allowed private group. And that's overall configuration that is needed over here. Just to confirm, our iPSK tag and has the policy. So with that, configuration of 9800 wireless controller is complete. We should be looking into our ISE server. So in ISE server, where do we need to get started? The first thing that we need to make sure is we add our wireless controller into ISE. And in order to do that, we will go into administration, network devices, making sure our wireless controller is there and its appropriate IP address, radius server shared secret. This is more important as changeover authorization port is there, default is configured by itself, and we save it. Next thing that we need to go and take a look into is administration and groups. So what are we trying to do over here is we are trying to go ahead and take a look into creating a two different groups. And for that, we will come back and take a look into why we have created two different groups, right? We have created an identity group called under unknown called iPSK, and this is the identity group. We could have named it differently to avoid the confusion. And as you can see, we have selected one purposely Apple device, but one is Intel, Microsoft, and all other devices addresses that we have put over here. Let's take a look into, we have also created a profiled Apple device and digital signage, and where we have our MacBook connected to there. Moving on, so we have created our network devices, added that information. We have created two different identity groups and associated MAC address in that identity group. One is under unknown iPSK, one is which is being profiled with Apple devices. Now we need to take a look into policy, results, policy elements, and results. So what are the authorization profiles that we have created, right? That is the another part that is very important where we need to have created a two different authorization profile. I know that you are going to talk about where under the groups we have created and the groups that are going to go ahead, try to connect. ICE needs to go ahead and take a look into their own authorization profile to confirm that, hey, you are going to have under this passphrase, right? And this is the passphrase that you are asking for. And then it is going to go back and confirm with that identity group that it is the part of it, and then provide that passphrase to controller, as we talked about. And also making sure that VLAN ID is being tagged with it as well. So for our case, we have an VLAN ID, which is there, 998. And let's take a look into over here, where we have a VLAN ID, which is tagged along with PSK mode, ASCII, and password, which is also created. Similarly, we have created a different profile, authorization profile called iPSK digital signage with a different VLAN ID 992 to separate and segregate. Now let's take a look into, have we configured those VLANs on 9800 controller? Yes, we have. And just for the sake of it, we have created an SVI, but it's down as you can see, of having a two different VLAN ID of 992 and 998. And we have the two VLANs that is being configured for digital signage and Ambassador iPad. So we have created on the Identity Service Engine our wireless controllers. We have created identity groups. For there, we have added particular MAC addresses. And then we have also checked whatever authorization profiles that we have created, both of it, for different VLANs for the different group of devices and their associated VLAN ID and passphrase. Let's take a look into, so that is the part that we have done most of it. The most important part is to go ahead and look into where we have configured it, right? Um, Let's take a look. Policy sets. So we have started with iPSK and we have created over here what is iPSK condition, right? So we have created over here the call station ID ends with iPSK, and this iPSK stands for the WLAN. And we can take a quick look about our WLANs where we have it, and we can see our WLAN ID is iPSK. Now moving on to further, let's take a look. Okay, you have created iPSK condition. Now in authentication policy, let's take a look into it that we have selected internal endpoints. And the most important, this is by default, but always double check, confirm that if authentication failed, reject, if user not found, reject, if process failed, drop, so that we can make sure our authentication policy is configured as needed. Now, let's move on to where exactly we created the three authorization policy, which is for ambassador iPads and digital signage. So these are just the names that we have configured over here. The conditions are defined over here. Let's take a look. What are those conditions for iPSK group? So remember we created a group of iPSK under unknown devices. So that's where it shows us that, hey, go ahead, take a look under the identity group, which is endpoint identity group is under unknown and iPSK. So that's where we have created an iPSK group name. And this is the feature which I know it works in 3.0, but it was not there in 2.7. Let's take a look into further, trying to understand and what are the profiles that we have it, right? iPSK group that we have selected and unknown group devices for which we are going to take a look under an iPSK authorization profile that we have selected. And under this, the group defines you the type of devices, and the profile is where you defined your PSK VLAN ID to confirm it. And similarly, we have created a digital signage. And we can see over here, like digital signage and its identity group, which ends with where we have profiled it, endpoint identity groups profiled, Apple devices, and it is known as digital signage that we have created. And we have only one device, and that for MacBook Pro. So that's where it confirms and makes sure that you have it created deny access under the last authorization profile. And this feeds confirm that, okay, these are the devices which tried to connect to it and it confirmed it worked. Going back into the dashboard, we can confirm 3 different devices and both are from the different, as we can see, this is where the digital signage 2.2 is in different VLAN ID compared to other authorization profile and identity group we have created for 4.2 and 4.5. And we can confirm going into VLANs, hey, which is which. So 992, you have it for digital signage, 998 is for 4 dot. Similarly, on a VLAN ID, you can confirm your digital signage 992 and ambassador iPad. We can also confirm that over here. Coming back over here, looking into operations, live logs, and this provides you the confirmation about digital signage, that Apple Identity Service, and this is under unknown, that was part of it. and you can see 4.2 and 4.5 part of it. And when you want to learn more details of it, we can take a, um, okay, let's take a look. Okay, looks like do not have access or record happened a week ago. Oh, okay, we can go back, take a look, July 24th, makes sense. Okay, this confirms configuration, IP address that we are able to see it. Okay, that completes our configuration for Cisco Identity PSK with Radius server on Cisco Catalyst 9800 wireless controller with ISE 3.0. Thank you for watching it.